Cole Bennett pulled over when he saw the weathered for sale sign half hidden in the blackberry brambles. The property had probably been on the market for years, judging by how the vegetation had reclaimed the driveway and most of what he could see of the old farmhouse. He wasn't looking to buy anything, but Cole had a thing for abandoned places, the stories they held, the lives that had passed through them. Plus, his bike needed a rest, and so did his back after 4 hours of riding down the Oregon coast. He killed the engine and swung off his Harley, stretching until his spine cracked. At 41, the long rides were getting harder, but Cole couldn't imagine giving them up. This was his meditation, his therapy, the space where he processed everything life threw at him. Like his father's death 3 months ago, the funeral where distant relatives asked what he was doing with his life, the realization that he was older now than his dad had been when Cole was born. The property sat back from Route 101, hidden behind overgrown Douglas firs and a collapsing fence. Cole walked up what used to be a driveway, his boots crunching on gravel that was more weed than stone now. The house was a classic Oregon farmhouse, probably built in the 20s or 30s, white paint peeling away to reveal gray wood beneath. The porch sagged, the windows were broken, and a massive rose bush had consumed most of the front facade. Cole wasn't a trespasser by nature, but something about the place pulled him forward. He walked around the perimeter, noting the collapsed barn out back, the rusted farm equipment slowly being absorbed by the earth, the remains of what might have been an orchard. Someone had lived here once, worked this land, probably raised a family. Now it was just bones and memories, waiting for someone to tear it down and build something new. He was about to head back to his bike when sunlight glinted off something in the dirt near the porch steps. Cole knelt, brushing away soil and dead leaves, and felt his breath catch. It was a medal, tarnished and crusted with decades of dirt, but unmistakably military. He picked it up carefully, turning it over in his hands. Even covered in grime, Cole recognized the distinctive bronze star with a red, white, and blue ribbon. Bronze Star. His grandfather had earned one in Korea, and Cole had spent enough time at VFW halls to know military decorations when he saw them. This one looked old, the ribbon faded almost to white, the metal oxidized to a dark brown green. Cole sat back on his heels, staring at the metal. Someone had earned this through exceptional service or valor. Someone had carried it home from a war, and somehow it had ended up here, lost or discarded, buried in the dirt of an abandoned property. That felt wrong in a way Cole couldn't articulate. He turned the metal over, looking for an engraving. The back was too dirty to read, but he could make out marks that suggested a name might be there. Cole pulled out his phone and took several photos, then carefully wrapped the metal in his bandana and tucked it into his jacket pocket. The Riders of the Coast Clubhouse was quiet when Cole arrived that evening, just a handful of brothers hanging around playing cards and watching a baseball game. The club wasn't large, maybe 20 members total, all of them over 35, all of them employed and relatively stable. No criminal element, no one-percenter nonsense, just guys who liked to ride and wanted the brotherhood that came with belonging to something. "Where'd you disappear to?" asked Marcus Doc Williams, the club president and an actual doctor, though the nickname predated his medical career by 20 years. "Riding," Cole said, pulling out the medal. "Found this at an abandoned property off 101. Bronze Star. Got to be 70, 80 years old." The card game stopped. Every man in the room knew what a Bronze Star meant. Doc took the medal carefully, turning it over in his hands with the same reverence Cole had felt. "There's an engraving on the back," Doc said, squinting at the tarnished metal. "Can't read it, though. Too much oxidation." "I can clean it," said Russell Forge Nakamura, who ran a jewelry repair shop and knew his way around metal restoration. "But carefully. We don't want to damage it." "Do it," Cole said. "I want to know whose this was. If there's family out there, they should have it." Russell took the medal home that night, and Cole spent the evening at his computer researching the property. The county records showed it had belonged to the Kimball family, purchased in 1919 by William and Sarah Kimball. It had stayed in the family until 1982, when it was sold to a developer who'd apparently done nothing with it. The developer had died in 2005, and the property had been in probate limbo ever since, slowly returning to wilderness. Cole dug deeper, searching for Kimballs in Oregon. He found William and Sarah's death records, William in 1944, Sarah in 1968. They'd had 2 sons according to the census records, Arthur, born 1933, and James, born 1935. But tracking what happened to them after 1950 was harder. The trail went cold. The next morning, Russell called, "Got it cleaned up enough to read. You're going to want to see this." At Russell's shop, Cole stared at the metal on the jeweler's cloth. The bronze gleamed now, the ribbon had been gently cleaned, and the engraving on the back was clearly visible. CPL, James W. Kimball, U.S. Army, 1953. "Korea," Doc said quietly. He'd come along out of curiosity and stayed out of respect. That date had to be Korea. "James Kimball," Cole said, pulling out his phone with his research notes. "Born 1935 in Oregon. He would have been 18 in 1953. Old enough to serve." "The question is how his Bronze Star ended up buried in the dirt at his family's property," Russell said. "You don't lose something like this. You don't throw it away." "And who do we return it to?" Doc added. "After 70 years, good luck finding family." But Cole had never been one to back down from a challenge. He'd taken up genealogy after his father died, trying to understand the family history his dad had never talked about. He knew how to search records, how to follow paper trails, how to be persistent when everyone else gave up. Over the next week, Cole became obsessed. He spent his evenings at the county records office, charming the clerk Susan Park into letting him access old property records, tax documents, anything that might mention the Kimball family. He searched military databases for James Kimball, finding a service record that confirmed he'd enlisted in 1952, served in Korea with the 2nd Infantry Division, and been awarded the Bronze Star for valor in combat in 1953. But then the record went strange. James had been discharged in 1954, returned to Oregon according to military records, but after that, nothing. No marriage license, no property records, no death certificate. He'd simply vanished. "People don't just disappear," Cole told Doc over beers at the clubhouse, "especially not in the 50s. There were records for everything." "Unless he didn't want to be found," Doc suggested. "Maybe he had his reasons." Cole thought about that. Korea had been brutal, the kind of war that broke men in ways people didn't talk about back then. PTSD wasn't even a diagnosis yet. Soldiers came home with invisible wounds and were expected to just get over it. Maybe James had come home and couldn't handle civilian life. Maybe he'd drifted, become homeless, died alone somewhere without identification. But that didn't explain the medal. If James had died or disappeared shortly after coming home, the medal would have stayed with the family. So how had it ended up buried in the yard? Cole's breakthrough came from an unexpected source. He'd posted about the medal in a veterans genealogy forum, hoping someone might recognize the name or have information. 2 days later, he got a message from a woman named Helen Rodriguez in Sacramento. "I think James Kimball was my uncle. My father was Arthur Kimball from Oregon. He had a brother named James who served in Korea. Can you call me?" Cole called immediately. Helen answered on the first ring, her voice tight with emotion. "Where did you find that medal?" Cole explained about the abandoned property, the glint of metal in the dirt. "I've been trying to track down family to return it." "Your father, is he still alive?" "He's 92, Helen said, living in Rosewood Nursing Home in Portland. His mind is mostly sharp, but his body's failing. He doesn't talk much about the past, especially not about his brother." "Why not?" Cole asked. Helen was quiet for a moment. "Because it breaks his heart. James died in Korea. At least, that's what Dad always told us. But there's something he's not saying, something he's carried for 70 years. She paused. "I think you finding that medal, and maybe it's time for Dad to tell the truth." 2 days later, Cole rode to Portland, the Bronze Star carefully wrapped in his jacket. The riders of the coast had insisted he not go alone, so Doc rode with him, the 2 of them making the 4-hour journey in comfortable silence, broken only by rest stops and the roar of engines. Rosewood Nursing Home was nicer than Cole expected, more like an assisted living community than an institutional facility. Helen met them in the lobby, a woman in her late 60s with her father's eyes and a nervous energy that spoke of secrets about to surface. "He's been agitated since I told him you were coming," Helen said, as they walked down the corridor. "Kept asking if I was sure, if it was really James's medal. I showed him the photos you sent. He cried. I've never seen my father cry. Arthur Kimball sat in a wheelchair by the window of his room, staring out at the garden. He was thin, shrunken with age, but his eyes were sharp when he turned to look at his visitors. Cole could see the soldier he'd been, the steel that had carried him through war and life. "Mr. Kimball," Cole said, approaching slowly. "My name is Cole Bennett. I'm the one who found this." He held out the bronze star. Arthur stared at the medal, not moving to take it. His hands trembled on the arms of his wheelchair. "Where?" he whispered. "Where did you find it?" "Buried in the dirt at your family's old property. The farmhouse off Route 101. "I buried it," Arthur said, his voice breaking. "I buried it in 1954, 70 years ago. Thought it would stay buried forever." Helen knelt beside her father's wheelchair. "Dad, what happened?" "You told us Uncle James died in Korea." "He did die," Arthur said. "Just not the way everyone thinks." He looked at Cole and Doc, assessing them. "You're veterans." "My grandfather served in Korea," Cole said. "My father in Vietnam." "I was a medic," Doc added. "Afghanistan." Arthur nodded slowly, recognizing kinship. "Then maybe you'll understand." He gestured to the chairs. "Sit down." "It's a long story, and I've kept it too long already." They sat, and Arthur began to speak, his voice gaining strength as the words that had been locked inside for 7 decades finally found their way out. "James and I enlisted together in 1952. I was 19, he was 17, had to lie about his age to get in. We wanted to serve, wanted to make our parents proud. They sent us to different units, but we were both in Korea by early 53. I was with the 7th Infantry, James with the 2nd. Arthur's hands clenched on the wheelchair arms. The fighting was hell. Worse than hell. We were kids playing at being soldiers, watching our friends die in frozen mud. I got wounded in April 1953, took shrapnel in my leg. They sent me to a field hospital, then eventually stateside for recovery. He paused, gathering himself. James wasn't so lucky. His unit got hit hard in July, right before the armistice. He was wounded, bad, lost his right leg below the knee, took a hit to the head that scrambled his brains. The Army sent him home a month after me, summer of 1954. Gave him the Bronze Star for pulling 3 men out of enemy fire before he got hit. He was a hero. But he came home, Helen said gently. That's good, right? He came home broken, Arthur said, tears streaming down his weathered face. The head wound, the trauma, the leg. He wasn't James anymore. He had violent episodes, nightmares, couldn't hold a conversation. This was 1954. Nobody knew what to call it. Shell shock, battle fatigue. They sent him home with pills and told our parents to keep him calm. Arthur wiped his eyes with a shaking hand. Our father had died in 44, so it was just Mom trying to take care of both of us. I was still recovering from my own wounds, useless as hell. And James was suffering. He'd wake up screaming, thinking he was back in Korea. One night he nearly killed Mom during an episode, thought she was an enemy soldier. After that, we knew we couldn't keep him at home. So what did you do? Cole asked quietly. We found a veterans hospital, Arthur said. Small place, private, up in Washington State. Specialized in cases like James, boys who came home with minds too broken to fix. Mom signed the papers, committed him. We thought it was temporary, thought he'd get better. Arthur's voice dropped to barely a whisper. He didn't get better. And after Mom died in 68, I was the only one who knew where he was. By then, he didn't recognize me anymore, didn't recognize anyone. The hospital said he'd be there for life. Dad, Helen said, shocked. You had a brother in a hospital for 50 years and never told us? How could I? Arthur asked, his face crumpling. How could I explain that we'd hidden him away? That we were ashamed of what the war had done to him? That we let him disappear rather than dealing with the reality of his injuries? He looked at the Bronze Star in Cole's hands. Before Mom committed him, I took his medal. Told her I'd keep it safe for when he got better. But after she died, after years of him not getting better, I couldn't stand looking at it. It reminded me of the brother I'd lost, the promise I'd broken. So I buried it in the yard, buried it deep, thought I was burying my guilt with it. The room was silent, except for Arthur's ragged breathing. Helen had her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "Is he still alive?" Doc asked. "Your brother?" Arthur shook his head. "He died in 1994. 40 years in that hospital. I was notified, went up for the funeral. There was nobody there except me and the chaplain. They buried him in the veterans cemetery there. No family, no friends. I stood there and promised him I'd tell the truth someday, but I never did. Until now." Cole looked at the Bronze Star, understanding now why finding it had felt so important. This wasn't just a lost medal. It was a buried truth, a hidden story, a man who'd been erased from his own family history because his wounds were inconvenient. "Where is he buried?" Cole asked. Arthur gave him the information. Silver Creek Veterans Cemetery in Washington, about 3 hours north of Portland. "I haven't been back since the funeral," Arthur admitted. "Too ashamed. Too much of a coward." "You're not a coward," Doc said firmly. "You were a kid dealing with impossible circumstances in an era that didn't understand trauma. You did the best you could." "Did I?" Arthur asked bitterly. "I buried my brother alive, let the world forget he existed, lied to my own children about how he died. If that's doing my best wasn't good enough." Helen had composed herself enough to speak. "Dad, I'm angry you didn't tell us. But I also understand. That generation, you didn't talk about things like this. You kept secrets to protect people." She gripped his hand. "But we can make it right now. We can honor Uncle James properly." "How?" Arthur asked. "He's been dead 30 years. Cole stood up, the Bronze Star in his hands. "We take this to him. We hold a proper memorial with family and the honor he deserved. We tell his story so people understand what war does to soldiers, what happens when we don't take care of our veterans. We make sure James Kimball isn't forgotten anymore." Arthur looked at him, hope and doubt warring on his face. Who would come? He's been gone so long. "We would," Doc said. "The Riders of the Coast. No, we'd be honored to stand with James Kimball and make sure he's properly remembered." "And I'll organize it," Helen said, her voice strengthening. "I'll contact what family we have left, reach out to veteran organizations, make sure Uncle James gets the recognition he earned." Over the next 3 weeks, Cole became the unofficial coordinator of James Kimball's memorial. Helen worked the family angle, tracking down distant cousins and relatives who'd heard whispers about a second Kimball boy, but never knew the truth. Cole worked the veteran community, reaching out to Korean War veteran groups, to the hospital where James had spent 40 years, to anyone who might have known him or served with him. The story spread. The local paper in Oregon ran an article about the found Bronze Star and the forgotten veteran. A TV station in Portland picked it up. Suddenly, James Kimball's story wasn't just family history. It was a reminder of all the soldiers who came home broken and were hidden away, the casualties of war that went uncounted. The Riders of the Coast took on the memorial as a club mission. They reached out to other motorcycle clubs, and within days, more than 50 bikers had committed to riding to Silver Creek. The VFW got involved, offering to conduct a proper military ceremony. The hospital where James had lived sent his records, photographs, notes from staff who'd cared for him over the decades. Cole spent hours reading those records. James had never recovered from his head injury, but he hadn't been catatonic either. He'd had moments of clarity, times when he'd talk about Korea, about his brother, about the farm he'd grown up on. The staff notes painted a picture of a man trapped inside his own damaged mind, aware enough to know what he'd lost, but unable to reach it. "This is heartbreaking," Cole told Doc one evening at the clubhouse. He was conscious. He knew where he was. He just couldn't escape it. "That's the worst kind of prison," Doc said. "And it happened to thousands of guys. We just don't talk about it." The memorial was scheduled for the last Saturday in September, exactly 70 years after James had been awarded his Bronze Star. Arthur insisted on attending despite his frail health. Helen rented a medical transport van to make the journey comfortable for him. The day arrived, clear and cool, perfect Pacific Northwest weather. Silver Creek Veterans Cemetery was small and peaceful, nestled in a valley with mountains visible in the distance. James's grave was in the Korea section, a simple white headstone that read, "James William Kimball, Corporal U.S. Army, 1935 to 1994 Korea." Cole arrived early with Doc and 5 other club members to set up. They placed flowers around James's grave, set up speakers for the ceremony, arranged chairs for the elderly attendees. By noon, more than 200 people had gathered. 53 motorcycles lined the cemetery road, riders from 7 different clubs who'd come to honor a veteran they'd never met. 30 Korean War veterans stood in formation, some in wheelchairs, some with canes, all wearing their old uniforms or veteran caps. Helen had found 12 relatives who'd made the journey, and in the front row, Arthur Kimball sat in his wheelchair, the bronze star in his lap, staring at his brother's grave. The VFW conducted the ceremony with military precision. A color guard presented the flag. A chaplain, Father Joseph O'Brien, a retired Army chaplain who'd served in Korea, spoke about sacrifice and the cost of war that extended far beyond the battlefield. James Kimball served his country with honor, Father O'Brien said, his voice carrying across the cemetery. He pulled 3 men from enemy fire, saving their lives at great cost to his own. He earned this Bronze Star through valor and selflessness, but his service didn't end when the shooting stopped. He served again by enduring, by surviving 40 more years with injuries that would have broken lesser men. He served by being a reminder that war doesn't end when soldiers come home. Sometimes it just changes battlefields. Helen spoke next, reading from letters James had written to his mother before his injury, full of love for his family and hope for the future. Her voice broke multiple times, but she pushed through, determined to let people hear her uncle's voice. Then Arthur was wheeled forward. Cole had helped him prepare remarks, but when the moment came, Arthur spoke from the heart. "I'm 92 years old," Arthur said, his voice thin but clear. "I've lived 7 decades since my brother came home broken from Korea. For most of those years, I pretended he didn't exist. I buried his medal in the dirt and tried to bury my guilt with it. I told my children he'd died in combat, because that was easier than explaining that he'd died slowly in a hospital, forgotten by everyone except the staff who cared for him." Tears ran freely down Arthur's face. I was ashamed of James, ashamed of his injuries, of his condition, of what war had done to him. That shame cost him everything. It cost him his family, his story, his rightful place in our history. And I'm here today to say, I was wrong. I was a coward. And I'm sorry. He held up the Bronze Star, the medal gleaming in the afternoon sun. Cole Bennett found this medal in the dirt where I'd buried it. He could have kept it, or sold it, or thrown it away. Instead, he spent weeks tracking down our family, uncovering the truth, making sure James's story was told. He did what I should have done 70 years ago. He honored my brother's service. Arthur looked directly at James's grave. "I'm sorry I failed you. I'm sorry I let shame win, but I promise you, from now on, people will know your name. They'll know what you sacrificed. They'll know you were a hero twice, once in Korea, and again every day you survived after coming home. You won't be forgotten anymore." Cole stepped forward and took the Bronze Star from Arthur's trembling hands. He knelt at James's grave and placed the medal at the base of the headstone, securing it with a small display case they'd prepared. The Bronze Star gleamed against the white marble, finally returned to its rightful owner. The ceremony concluded with taps, the lonely notes drifting across the cemetery. As the last note faded, the motorcycle riders started their engines in unison, the rumble a final salute. They rode past James's grave in single file, each rider saluting as they passed. Afterward, people lingered, not ready to leave. Veterans shared stories about Korea, about coming home to a country that didn't understand what they'd been through. Younger veterans talked about Iraq and Afghanistan, about seeing the same cycle repeat. Helen and Arthur were surrounded by family members who'd learned the truth and were trying to process it. Cole found himself standing at James's grave with Doc, looking at the Bronze Star in its display case. "You did good," Doc said. "This whole thing, you gave this family closure. You gave James the honor he deserved." "I just found a medal," Cole said. "Everything else was already there, waiting to be uncovered." "Don't undersell it," Doc said. "You could have turned that medal over to the county and walked away. Instead, you spent weeks tracking down family, researching history, organizing all this. You did it because you believed James Kimball deserved better. That matters." A Korean War veteran approached them, leaning heavily on a cane. His name tag read, Walter Zhang. I knew James, he said without preamble. We were in the same field hospital in '53. I'd taken a bullet to the shoulder. He was there with his leg and head injuries. We talked a few times before they shipped him stateside. What was he like? Cole asked. Scared, Walter said honestly. Knew something was wrong with his head, knew he wasn't thinking right. He asked me to make sure someone told his family he loved them if he didn't make it. I said I would, but I lost track of him after we went home. He looked at the grave. I'm glad I could keep that promise today, even if it took 70 years. I told his brother. James loved his family. Walter saluted the grave and walked away, leaving Cole and Doc in contemplative silence. That evening, after most people had left, Helen wheeled Arthur back to his brother's grave for a private moment. Cole stayed nearby, giving them space but ready if they needed anything. I wish I could take it back, Arthur said to the headstone. All those years. I wish I'd been braver. You're being brave now, Helen said gently. You told the truth. You let people honor him. That counts. Does it? Arthur asked. Is it enough? It has to be, Helen said, because it's all we can give him now. They sat in silence for a few minutes. Then Arthur asked Cole to come closer. I want you to have something, Arthur said. From his pocket, he pulled out a faded photograph. This is James and me, summer of 1952, just before we enlisted. I've carried it for 70 years. The photo showed two young men in civilian clothes, standing in front of the farmhouse, their arms around each other's shoulders. They could have been any brothers, any young men about to face the world. Looking at it, knowing how their stories had diverged, was almost unbearable. I don't want you to forget him, Arthur said. Even after I'm gone, after Helen's gone, after everyone who knew him is gone. Someone should remember. I'll remember, Cole promised, and I'll make sure others do too. In the weeks that followed, Cole kept that promise. He created a website documenting James Kimball's story, using the hospital records, Arthur's memories, and the research he'd done. He gave talks at VFW halls and veteran events about the hidden casualties of war, the soldiers who came home but weren't really home. He worked with Helen to establish a small memorial fund that provided support for veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder and traumatic brain injuries. The story went viral in veteran communities. Other families came forward with similar stories, brothers, uncles, fathers, who'd been institutionalized and forgotten. Each story was a variation on the same theme: shame, secrecy, the inability of society to deal with the psychological costs of war. Arthur lived 6 more months, dying peacefully in his sleep in March. His funeral was well attended, and afterward, they took him to Silver Creek to be buried next to James. The brothers, separated for 70 years, were finally together again. At Arthur's funeral, Helen gave Cole a box of materials: James's letters from Korea, medical records, photographs, Arthur's own written memories. Dad wanted you to have these, she said. He said you're James's historian now. You're the one who will make sure his story survives. Cole accepted the responsibility, understanding the weight of it. He wasn't a Kimball by blood, but he'd become part of their story by finding that medal, by refusing to let it remain buried. A year after James's memorial, the Riders of the Coast made it an annual tradition. Every September, they rode to Silver Creek for a ceremony honoring James and all the forgotten veterans, the ones who came home broken and were hidden away. The event grew each year, more clubs joining, more families sharing their own stories. Cole became something of an accidental activist, speaking at conferences about veteran care and the long-term costs of combat trauma. He testified before the state legislature about funding for veteran mental health services. He partnered with universities researching PTSD and traumatic brain injury, all because he'd stopped at an abandoned property and found a glint of metal in the dirt. 5 years after finding the Bronze Star, Cole returned to the old Kimball property. It had finally sold, and the new owners were planning to restore the farmhouse rather than tear it down. They'd heard about James Kimball's story and wanted to honor it somehow. Cole walked the property with the owners, showing them where he'd found the medal, telling them about the family that had lived there, about the 2 brothers who'd gone to war and returned broken in different ways. We're thinking of turning it into a retreat center, the owner said, for veterans dealing with PTSD, a place where they can find peace, work the land, heal without judgment. We'd call it the Kimball House. Cole felt tears sting his eyes. James would like that. Arthur, too. The retreat center opened 2 years later, a fully restored farmhouse with gardens and workshops and quiet spaces for healing. The first group of residents included 3 Iraq veterans, 2 from Afghanistan, and 1 Vietnam vet who'd been living on the streets for 40 years. They worked the gardens, restored the old barn, and slowly rebuilt themselves in the space where James Kimball had grown up. On the wall in the main room hung James's bronze star in a glass case, along with his photo and his story. Every resident learned about the boy who'd gone to war and the brother who'd buried his medal in the dirt. They understood what it meant, how shame and secrecy compounded trauma, how being forgotten was sometimes worse than the original wound. Cole visited the retreat center regularly, sometimes riding up alone, sometimes bringing other club members. He'd sit with the residents and listen to their stories, bearing witness the way someone had needed to witness James's story 70 years earlier. On one visit, a young Marine who'd lost both legs in Afghanistan asked Cole why he did all this. "You didn't know James Kimball. He wasn't even your relative. Why does his story matter so much to you?" Cole thought about his father, about legacy, about the things we leave behind. "I found his medal when I was trying to figure out what my own life meant," Cole said. "My dad had just died, and I was questioning everything. Then I literally stumbled onto this piece of history, this story, that had been buried and forgotten, and I realized that meaning isn't something you find. It's something you create by showing up, by caring, by refusing to let important things stay buried." He looked around the retreat center at the veterans finding their way back to life. James Kimball deserved better than being forgotten. Every veteran does. So yeah, I show up. I tell the stories. I make sure people remember. Because if we forget our veterans, if we let them disappear into institutions or streets or silence, then what the hell are we fighting for? The Marine nodded slowly. "My family doesn't know how to talk to me since I came home. It's like they're embarrassed about the wheelchair, about my injuries. I thought maybe it was just me." "It's not just you," Cole said. "It's never just you." James's family loved him, but they didn't know how to deal with his injuries, so they hid him away. That happened to thousands of guys, still happens. But here, at this place, you don't have to hide. You can be broken and healing at the same time. That's the whole point. 10 years after finding the Bronze Star, Cole stood at Silver Creek Veterans Cemetery during the annual memorial. The event had grown beyond anything he'd imagined. More than 500 people attended now, including 3 congressmen, the state's governor, and representatives from veteran organizations across the country. James Kimball's grave had become a pilgrimage site for those interested in veteran mental health and the hidden costs of war. But for Cole, it remained personal. He still came early, still placed flowers at James's grave, still sat for a while in quiet contemplation. This year he'd brought his nephew, a 17-year-old kid, thinking about joining the army. "Is this supposed to scare me?" the kid asked, looking at all the graves. "No," Cole said. "It's supposed to make you think about what service really means, about what it costs, about how we treat people after they've given everything." He gestured to James's grave. This man was a hero twice, once in combat and again every day he survived afterward with injuries that would have killed most people. But his family was ashamed of him, so he died alone and forgotten. We can't let that happen anymore. "What if that happens to me?" the kid asked quietly. "Then I'll find you," Cole said simply. "I'll make sure you're not forgotten." That's what this whole thing has taught me. We survive by showing up for each other, by refusing to let anyone fall through the cracks. You serve, you come home, you've got a whole community ready to catch you. That's the promise. Later, during the ceremony, Helen Rodriguez, now 78 but still sharp, gave the keynote speech. She talked about shame and secrets, about how one man's decision to look for answers had healed her family's decades-old wound. Cole Bennett didn't have to care about a tarnished medal he found in the dirt, Helen said. He could have kept it as a souvenir, or turned it in to authorities and forgotten about it. Instead, he spent weeks researching, tracking down family, uncovering a story my father had kept hidden for 70 years. He gave my uncle the honor he deserved and gave my father the chance to finally tell the truth. She looked directly at Cole in the crowd. That kind of persistence, that kind of care for a stranger's story, that's what changes the world. Not big dramatic gestures, but one person deciding that every story matters, every veteran matters, every truth deserves to be told. The applause was thunderous. Cole felt his face flush with embarrassment and pride in equal measure. After the ceremony, as the sun set and the crowd dispersed, Cole found himself alone at James's grave one more time. The bronze star gleamed in its display case, exactly where it belonged. Around it, people had left tokens, challenge coins, photos, letters, small American flags. James Kimball had gone from forgotten to honored, from a buried secret to a symbol of all the invisible casualties of war. Cole thought about the chain of small choices that led here, his decision to pull over at an abandoned property, his curiosity about a glint of metal in the dirt, his refusal to just turn the metal over to authorities, his persistence in tracking down family, Arthur's courage in finally telling the truth, Helen's determination to honor her uncle properly. Every choice had mattered, had built on the previous one, creating something none of them could have accomplished alone. "Thank you," Cole said quietly to the grave, "for teaching me that every story matters. That legacy isn't what we leave behind, it's what we choose to uncover and honor in others." He placed his hand on the cool marble headstone, a gesture of connection across the decades. Somewhere, he liked to think, James knew he hadn't been forgotten, that 70 years after being buried in a meadow in the dirt out of shame, the truth had been unearthed, that his story had become a catalyst for healing, for change, for ensuring other veterans wouldn't suffer in silence and isolation. Cole stood and walked back to his motorcycle, where Doc was waiting. They had a 4-hour ride back to the coast, but neither of them minded. The road was where they processed things, where they found peace, where they understood their place in the world. As they rolled out of the cemetery, Cole looked back once. The setting sun caught the bronze star, making it gleam like a beacon, a marker not just of valor in combat, but of the ongoing battle to honor our veterans, to tell their stories, to ensure that no one who serves is forgotten. It had started with a medal in the dirt. It had become something far larger, a movement, a promise, a commitment to bearing witness to the hidden costs of service. And it continued, one story at a time, one veteran at a time, ensuring that heroes like James Kimball would never be buried and forgotten again. The motorcycle's engines roared to life, and Cole and Doc rode into the evening, carrying James's story with them, ready to tell it to anyone who'd listen. Because that was the real honor, not just remembering, but ensuring others remembered too, keeping the promise that Arthur had broken and Cole had kept, making sure that every veteran's story mattered, even 70 years after it should have been told.